Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming to this roundtable with, well, some of the biggest personalities in the video game industry. Today we are talking about how to strategically plan your game studio ahead of 2020 to 22, sorry. And today we are Eva Gaspar, CEO of Abylight Studios, Dino, Patti, CEO of Konning, Rami, Ismail, independent developer, and Maarteen the Konning, Executive Vice President at DDM. So I'm starting with the first question. There is a lot of planning when embarking in game development, especially when creating a studio from the ground for the first time. So how would you first approach this task? Is there any specifics you could share with the audience, and what are the points you should be paying attention at first? A lot of questions, I know, sorry.
I think one of the first things you need to think out, of course, the vision and the prototype. The first scope of gameplay you want to show anybody, because I think whatever you make first is what you need, is what you use to either attract somebody. If you're a graphic artist, you can start with some images, but in the humbler beginnings, when you don't have that much resources, it's so important to get a small scope and get something out, and visually, many people do the lore, which I think doesn't cut it so much anymore, like just in written text. Mm-hmm. But yeah, generally the first prototype.
Do you guys want to share something about this?
Well, I think it's all about a playable. I fully agree. It starts, if you have a game business, everything starts with having a playable, right? that showcases the team strength and whatnot. Me being a video game agency, I would also, being a video game agent, I would argue that, also have a business plan. It sounds dusty, yeah. But I think eventually, when you go out with your playable, you're looking for partners, or maybe you're not looking for partners, you still want to have a business plan that I think, highlights your mission statement, highlights what your key pillars are, what is the balance between work for hire and original IP, if it's original IP, what's your, do you have a franchise plan? This sounds all very corporate, but I think you really, from the get-go, you want to think outside of the box and plan for things instead of only having the playable. But it definitely starts with the playable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You go.
Okay, I go. Yeah, I think, if you're starting a studio, usually you don't have that many resources. You don't have a lot of information. You basically have nothing. You probably have a number of team members. And I think between the two answers, you kind of hear one sort of common theme, which is get to the things you need fast. I see a lot of studios who spend like a year, 2 years trying to prove that they can make a prototype, or if it needs to move fast, right? You're on your own money, you're on your own time. The faster you can get and move the risk away from you to a partner that's better equipped, or a funder or a publisher, the better it is. So I always hate seeing indies doing their first game and then they have they come to me and they're like, yeah, we're a year and a half in, the full art style is implemented, and we're going to start pitching. And I'm like, you could have probably started on this a year ago, start with some mock-ups, do some paint overs of your screenshots, get your business plan ready. People, with business plans, you don't have to get it right instantly. Market research is really simple. If somebody funds you, it's a good business plan.
Yep.
If nobody funds you, it's a bad business plan. Fix it, right? So a lot of it is about iteration, and it's a word you'll hear over and over in the games industry, but it's true for your game, for your prototype, for your business plan, for your vertical slice, for your team, for the procedures that you have. So just get something on the ground and start rolling, and don't spend too much time trying to get it perfect before you start talking about it, or before you start doing it. Just start going.
And that was also one of the strengths you had with Flambear, right? Where you guys were churning out great prototypes, rapid prototyping, new playables, testing things out. I think that was a strength of you guys, really going fast, right?
Well, I would like to point on be careful who you choose as your partners. So I would go on the team. Setting up a company is normally setting up a partnership. I think it's a very serious commitment. And for me, was the first biggest commitment of my life. I'm still married to that commitment, and that doesn't. It comes with a lot of issues and problems, and partnering with someone, it's definitely not 1 + 1 makes 2. That makes no sense. When you're partnering in a company to create value, to create wealth, it has to be 1 + 1 plus whoever else times 3, 5, 6. Otherwise, don't do it. If it's going to be 1 + 1, 2, don't do it, because eventually it's going to be divide, because it's hard.
When you talk partnerships, do you mean the first people you kind of hire, or like the first people you...
No.
Co-founders.
Hire you, yeah,
The
exactly,
co-founders, okay.
co-founders.
Which of course you have a lot of experience with as well.
Yeah.
I think everyone here involved has
Yeah.
like a former
Of
business
course.
and a former partner.
Yeah.
It's challenging to find the right partner because you
Yeah.
only know while you do it and,
Right.
and go further.
But I also think the point that Eva's making about the commitment is really important, because it is a big commitment,
Yep.
right? And I think treating it as a multiplier, like, you know, you can't just be me and this other person means we're going to do work that is twice our normal output. No, it has to be bigger than that. You want to be filling each other's like weak spots, blind spots, and that's why diversity comes in as well for early partnership. But the other thing that I think jumps off at that point is, if you're going to start something, if you come out of a game jam or a school project or something, you tend to be like 4 people, 6 people. That's not a good founder structure, right? It just, starting a company with like 6 founders is going to kill the company.
Yep.
No matter what. Like, it's too much. It's
Going to
even
poison your cap table, and if you eventually want to find investment, right, and you have 6 or 8 founders, as you say, I mean, it's going to be a challenge.
But also just decision making becomes a
horrible.
problem. Like
Yep.
too many cooks in the kitchen, all of that. So if you're a game dev team that is coming out of a game jam and you're like 6 people, I hate to say this, but you probably should be less than 6 people to start.
So there is a say that's something like the greatest partnerships is sorry, not pares, nones. So I don't have the word. So 1, 3, 5, 7, right?
Uneven, odd,
Odd numbers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. So it has to be odd numbers and smaller than 3. So that's the best partnership idea, right? Obviously, I believe that you become better when you share, because there's complementary talents that you need in a company, and you need them to be committed. But be mindful that whoever comes into that partnership has to withstand the waves of sorrow, of desperation, of not meeting your deadlines. I don't know, of creative, hurdles.
Yeah.
It's tough. So
And I think that's
just-
important, the commitment, right?
Yeah.
I think if you're 7, you cannot really gauge if everybody is equally as committed when shit hits the fan. If you're 2, you know you can feel another person. Maybe also if you're 3, but yeah, above that you really need to think about it.
Yeah. No, and I think decision-making structure, responsibility, I think is a really good one. Like when we're jumping off of the business plan, who is responsible for what is a really
Super important.
Yeah.
really
That's a good
important
point
thing.
to raise, yeah.
At Vlaanderen, my old game studio, I was in charge of business. Actually, I was in charge of pretty much everything except for core game design.
Yeah.
That was Jan Willem. And it meant that if I had an idea for the game design and Jan Willem put it in, my co-founder at Vlaanderen put it in, and then it was a bad choice, it was still his fault. Because he was in charge of design,
Yeah.
right? And that meant that no matter how the idea happened, no matter where it came from, he was where responsibility stopped for game design, and I was where responsibility stopped for marketing and business and hiring and all of those things. And it made it very clear if something went wrong, what happened and where we should improve the process. And it wasn't like, haha, he fucked up. It wasn't like, that wasn't the point of it. But the point was that we sort of could iterate on the process and like figure out, okay, so this was a bad choice. Here's where it happened.
Yeah.
So you guys are basically replying all my questions in once. But I'm trying to, just maybe obtain something from what you said. You were talking about having a business plan, mean, the recommended number of members in a company, the dangers of selling your company, etc. So, of course, one of the biggest challenges of when launching a studio is making it economically viable. What steps should we follow when budgeting? I know this is very, general, but maybe broadly speaking, we can talk about hiring, marketing, publishing. I know it's a lot, but just maybe basic steps.
Could I start with this one?
Of course.
It looks like you
Just
want
don't cover all of it.
I want this one.
Sure,
All
go
right.
ahead.
So there's a trick about business that you kind of need to know, which is that it works the other way than you think, right? If you've not been an entrepreneur, you've not been in business, the value of things you make is effectively speculative, which means that a thing that you make has no value until somebody gives it value by paying for it or by funding you, right? So a lot of indies I come across, when they're making a game, what they say is, okay, we have this amount of money, right? So this is the game we can make. It's with this amount of money. But when you look for funding, you're trying to sell the thing you're going to make at the end, and it doesn't have a value yet, right? So the way budgets work actually is publishers, funders are trying to weigh two things, which is how much money you need, which is their risk, and how much money they think you'll make, which is their opportunity, right? They're trying to measure those things. And the less experienced you are, the more risky you are, right? If you've shipped a game, you're far less risky of an investment than if you've never shipped a game. If you've shipped 10 games, you're less risky. If you've shipped a game at a certain budget, and you're asked for the same budget again, you're less risky, right? But if you're starting out, you're basically super risky, right? So we're not going to be able to go too far with our budget. But you can go much further than you think. I come across indies who say like $180,000, is that a lot of money for a game? And I'm like, well, if Microsoft buys lunch for every person in their company and the lunch is $1, that's $180,000. It's not a lot of money, right? What is important is when you have a budget, that it is viable. It has to make sense, right? And the way investors, publishers look at investments is they're trying to double or triple the amount of money that they put into your company. So if you can make an argument, if you can prove by looking at other games that have released, or looking at the market, or looking at Steam reviews, and figure out how much money certain games make, you can actually make a really good sort of judgment for yourself. So don't think about budget when you're dreaming up your game, right? Dream up your game. Then look at the money you need and be honest with yourself.
Yes.
None of this bullshit of like, oh, I'm not going to take salary or I'll take less money, because the biggest risk to a publisher is you don't ship.
Yep.
Which if you don't pay yourself, that's pretty high chance that you're not going to ship, right?
Yep.
So dream up the game, figure out the budget by being honest. You can hire additional people, that's okay, right? Like just put that in the budget.
Yep.
And then you're going to do three things. You're going to look for a game that has made about 70% of your budget as revenue. That's your worst case scenario. You're going to look for a game that has made that amount of money, and the game you're promising the publisher or the investor has to be better than that 70% game. Clearly better, no question about it. Do it again for 130%. 130% because that's 100% plus 30% platform fee, so that's break even. You hit that 130%, your game needs to be as good as that 130% game. And you do it one more time with 300%. That game can be slightly better than yours, but I have to believe that your game can be that good, right? So you don't start with budget by going like, okay, we need this amount of money. No, you start with budget by looking at how much money can I promise you as investor that you can make. And then you work backwards from there, right? So budgeting is less about this is what we need and more about how much can I convince you that we will make. If I can convince one of you that I will make you $3,000 if you give me $1,000 and you have $1,000, then it would be a pretty good deal to give me $1,000 if I can convince you of that, right?
Yep.
That's effectively how publishers look at it, how funding looks
No,
at it.
and what you also raised, I mean, I think you need to be honest about your weaknesses. I mean, you pitch, you have a budget, as Rami mentioned, and hey, you need to prove you can deliver a game, but also be very honest. Like, these are the aspects we're not good at as a developer, or I need to hire X amount of people, or we need to do co-dev or have another team doing the multiplayer mode, for example, if you're only doing single player games. But be honest. I think that's always very important, to choose your strengths and double down on your strengths, but then also underlining what your weaknesses are.
On the line of the budget, I think it's also, I think quite rarely you get all the money you need. and you have to think about it as a multiple stage rocket. And this is something you probably starting out don't know anything about, but a lot of people can tell you a lot about the different possibilities. There's sometimes government stuff. There's sometimes angel funding. There's sometimes if you do a good demo publishers, but you have to realize that maybe the whole budget needs to be cut into those stages. So one stage is the maybe angel takes you to the prototype of Vertical Slice. Then there's then you need the next step, which is maybe publisher. I personally hate publishers, as you probably know. They're the worst.
No, that's not true. That's just a personal opinion.
Yes,
Side note.
that is no. That's the absolute truth.
Strongly held personal opinion. Personal opinion, nevertheless.
But that is money you can take. But you have to think about that because there's a road ahead, and if you kind of get your studio to a stage where you get like two stages, you get an investment and you get a publisher, and then you still don't have enough money, then you're actually screwed because then but it's not so much you cannot get another publisher. Usually when you have gotten a publisher, investors, because publishers are evil, of course. They take, usually half of your earnings. You get less worth in the end. So you have to think about these stages and plan ahead and figure out either to cut your scope or how to fire the rocket in maybe 2 or maybe 3 stages.
I'm just wondering if this is the outlook from Northern Europeans versus Southern Europeans, which is what's going on in my mind and my experience as an indie developer, because it seems like money flows so easily in the North. That it's so easy. I've even heard some developers
compared to the rest of the world, absolutely,
and
no question about it.
it's so shocking. I don't know how that translates and how long that will be like that, because it's been like 10 years of there's no issue in the video game industry, right? So eventually here we're having also developers that get funded by publishers, good and bad, and there are developers that get the resources. There are public institutions that actually finance, not for free, you have to give it back, but still it's money available, and that's always good because it's true, you need to pay yourself too, if you want to, do something. But I'm not sure how that translates into the Spanish industry, which I think a lot of people maybe here are from.
Yeah.
One of the weaknesses that we have in Spain is that the publishing side is not that well developed as the indie side or the dev side. And it is a challenge to get funding. And it is a reality. It's getting better. It's getting better because there are more developers that actually are doing well, and they also invest in the industry. That's a fact. We go into publishing. That's why not all of them are bad. But still, I notice a jump. There is a jump into the perspective of a Nordic developer versus a southern developer.
It's huge. Opportunity is very different up in Northwest Europe than it is in a lot of the rest of one thing I always tell people in Southern Europe, but also in Africa and South America and in Asia is a lot of people have this tendency to self-filter for publishers when they reach out. They go like, oh, Devolver Digital, Raw Fury, and then they email those two, and then they have to wait for 3 weeks to get a response, and then they, like one of the benefits that I think a lot of developers in the North have is just much easier networking connections, right? Lots of publishers up in the Nordic territories.
Different culture too.
Different culture as well. I think one of the biggest tips I give to developers in the south of Europe is there's this list online, and whether publishers are evil or not, like let's leave that in the middle. If they have money for you to make your first game, my first goal as an indie studio is ship a game. Ship a commercial game. I don't give a shit whether you make $0 in total, right? Whether you get 0% recoup, whatever. If you can be back at the exact same spot you are now, but you've shipped a game, and you're not in debt, fuck
That's-
yeah, let's go.
Yeah,
right?
that's a great
So-
success.
When you reach out to publishers or other things, there's this list made by an independent developer called Alan Dang. Alan Dang, right? It's a free list. It has every indie games publisher in games on it, with their email address, what platforms they're shipping on, with submission forms. It's free. Alan just upkeeps it for free. If you're going to pitch a game, if you're going to talk to publishers, you email every single. Sorry, can I curse?
No.
You email every single one.
No.
And here's the reason.
No, don't do that.
She won't be happy with that. But here's the thing.
I have a better tip for that.
Do not make a selection, right? We're going to disagree, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
No,
Do
you
not
don't
make
go
a
wide,
selection.
yeah.
Do not make a selection. Email every single one of them, and most of them are going to ignore you or they're going to say no. They'll forget about you in 5 days. Hell, they'll forget about you in 15 minutes. They're going to look at the thing and they're going to like, fuck this. This is not our shit, right? This is not our genre. This is not our market. Every now and then, you'll get a publisher who isn't your genre, but they're going into your genre. They're not doing your type of game, but they're going into your type of game. I've signed 10, 20, 30 indie developers in the last 2 years, emailing publishers that do not do their kind of work. Just let them say no, right? And yeah, you're going to waste somebody's time for like 2.5 minutes. Because
Plus
they're
you get free feedback. I mean, normally they come.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
sometimes
if
the
they're a good
feedback
publisher,
is
they
just
feedback
like-
on the game, so you get free feedback on your game.
I mean, hell, I would say start with the publishers you like least,
Yeah.
with the ones you don't want to work with, and then just see how they respond, because then you can learn and be better when you get to the publishers that you do want to work with, right? But here's the thing, the world is unfair, and it's mostly stacked against y'all, right?
Yep.
So might as well use their time. Fuck them. Use their time, send them an email, and then worst case scenario, they're just going to ignore you. So what, right? Like, so from where I'm sitting, just do it. Just email, but obviously don't email a mobile publisher with a PC console game.
So you have to filter.
Only platform.
So you
Only
do have to
platform.
filter.
Only platform. Do only filter platform. Nothing else. Not whether you like them, not whether they've only done games that are blue and your game is green. I literally don't give a shit. But yeah, platform. That's fair. Filter on platform.
There are some
Right, so-
filters that can
Yeah,
be.
you might as well
But
let
it's
them
a
say
good
no.
starting point. No, I like that. I like that.
their
You
money.
know, first go for the ones that you are easily, you know, forgetting about, because for a good chance you will get feedback. I like that, because it is true. You want to be perfect by the time that you get to the one you want to be with.
And then
Yeah,
know
absolutely.
your ask. You know, I mean, I think we talked about this, but
Yeah.
know what you're asking for, what you want,
Budget, timeline.
budget again, what kind of deal you want. But I mean, that's likely a whole different session because we have a few additional questions and we're drifting away a little bit. But
A lot.
It's fine. It's fine. You guys are talking a lot and giving a lot of, clues, to maybe make some adventure like better and not a nightmare, basically. But I was actually, I wanted to ask you about, for example, maybe that wants to embark alone, and create a studio by themselves, which I know Rami thinks is a horrible idea. But maybe if you want to look for a partner, how would you do that? How would you you gave a very nice idea before, but
Honestly, the way I found my partner developing games, my co-founder, was just I hated this guy at school. And then I hated school more than I hated that guy. So when we dropped out, I started working with him. Like, I think the thing with like meeting partners is you just meet people.
yeah.
There's not really, you can't really like put a search out for a partner. You meet people, and then.
But also,
sometimes
you can also not
connect.
decide for a game you want to make and then search for a partner for that. I think it has to be like a trifecta. It has to be somebody that is, you talk with a person about your idea and that person is fully into it, and you suddenly create it together in your minds, and then you can start from that.
Or even better, if you're going to set up a company, think about what you want to do as a company, because a company is supposed to live beyond that first game. So be very mindful that one thing is to do a game and another thing is to do a company. And if you're going out to set up a company, you have to find the partner for the company. Because if you need resources to do a game, just hire them. It's always going to be cheaper, efficient, because they're going to do whatever you pay them, well, hopefully, whatever you pay them to do.
I agree with you, but I just feel most people, when they started out, they have an idea about one game. And
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
true, but it's a mistake.
yeah, it's the mistake. I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
everybody said it to us also when we set up Played It. You know, think it's next game. We're like, what the fuck? We need this game out first. I mean, it is really hard. I agree with you. It's a good idea to think about the company, and we got it. Like everybody said it to us, we didn't do it before. You know, before you had 2 games, and then you slowly start to say, oh, this is the type of studio we are.
So was a narrative for you important with Playdead, for example, or came that later with your new ventures? Because I normally think having a narrative around your studio is super important, you know? You sell stuff by having a narrative. It gives it more character, identity, DNA, etc.
Like the studio, giving a studio narrative.
Yeah, the studio narrative, but also what type of games you want to make. I mean, is there something you believed in back then, or anything that defined your studio?
Yeah, so I think we started just with the first game, and that was it. And then we slowly, as we got through that and launched that, like invented the narrative around that, I think.
Yeah.
I will say one of the most common consultancy calls I get, because I do consultancy for indie studios, one of the most common ones I have that I really hate being stuck in is we accidentally started a studio, we shipped our first game, it's a hit, and we can't agree on shit anymore. Because the only thing the team agreed on was that first game, right? And then when they get to the second game, it turns out they have different goals, different directions, different attitudes. They don't want to make the same games. They only align on that one game. And it's really painful because it usually ends up with a fight or like with the disintegration of the studio. Nobody gets to keep the IP.
Is it also where there's a lot of founders?
Sorry?
Is it also where there's a lot of founders?
The more founders, the harder it is, right? But I've seen it with 2, but usually teams with 6, that definitely happens just consistently, right? So I think you're totally right. Like, we had the benefit when we started our studios of not having to think about that because our competitors weren't thinking about that, right? Indies were just making a game. So studio culture wasn't a topic yet. It's just, you just make some fucking video games, right? Now everybody is thinking about this sort of like the long term of the studio, the where are we going? What is the next game? What is our narrative? What is the story? And I think Vlambeer had a strong story, but it was also, we were making games in like 3 months.
Exactly.
So we were really fast. You were working on a game for 2 years.
Right? It was like, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it just kind of happens as you make stuff, but also it would be good to have a conversation about it, to be aligned, and at least make sure that you don't have completely different goals beside this one game.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. No, I was going to say that it's like when you find a partner for your life, I mean, you just don't randomly do that. You have to, you know, share thoughts and vision and you know, life has a way of sometimes giving you success, sometimes giving you failure. But through those 2, you have to continue marching on. And the people that you're set up to do that has to be aligned on how to do both. Because it's challenging the 2 things. Success has its own challenges and also failure. Because, of course, it seems like when you're failing, it's like, oh my God, so I would like to fail by success, right? But it is something that we say. It's good that we have success now that we've been so many years after, because we're more level-headed. If, you know, when big success comes, we know what we're doing. We're not just plundering. We're not, you know, we're already, we know what we're doing, right? Yeah. But just have a conversation. It's every week, every day with your partners. And that's so important.
And another thing to keep in mind is you're not stuck with them forever, right? Like Vlambeer stopped in 2020. But one of the things I will say is if you're going to have a partnership with somebody, a company with somebody, just make sure the legal part is filled out properly. Like just you know, have a contract with like termination clauses. If we quit, this is what happened. This person gets this person gets that. IP goes this way, that goes that way. It sounds really boring, but it's probably the best
Super
like
important.
700.
And always think from a bad scenario perspective.
Yeah,
right?
just
yeah.
Make contracts while you're friends. That's the rule, right? Because you're not going to be able to figure it out when you're no longer friends. So just when you're starting the company, you're hopefully friends, or at least you like each other, or you might be partners.
You're okay
you-
talking to each other.
Yeah, you might be school friends, you might be lovers, whatever it is. Just write the fucking contract then, and make sure it's just in place. Just
So Karen,
Hi everyone. So there exists the common misconception that as an indie developer, you need to create a company. So is this really necessary, or is there an alternative way to commit?
As an indie developer,
Yes.
you can do it solo. You don't have to be a
Yeah.
company.
no, but
Or what do you
need
mean?
to have an entity. You know, I mean, have an entity. Make sure the legal stuff is in place, as
Yeah.
you mentioned. Make sure you have a liability insurance. I mean,
if-
these are things I would highly advise for any indie developer
right.
to have.
Just
if you're gonna
from
work
a
with partners.
purely legal perspective, a lot of platforms won't do business with you unless you are a legal entity. But a legal entity can also be a sole proprietorship. So it doesn't have to be a company. It can be that you as a person are registered as entrepreneur, and as entrepreneur you do business, right? That's agreeable. You can do it alone. It doesn't have to be a company. It doesn't have to be a team. You can do it alone.
And I think also learning from the movie industry, you could also technically, so I've seen some people do it, set up a studio around one thing, just hire in consultancy. I don't think it would work for like a 80-man thing, because but for a smaller thing, just hire in people for the time you need them, and do that thing. I've seen people
Almost
do
like a
it.
Production house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Movies does it all the time. There's structure around that, right?
It's kind of a complicated question because it's two questions at once, right? Do you need a team? No. Is it beneficial?
But you can hire. That's the point. I mean,
you can.
and there are Spanish developers that are very successful, that are indie developers, and they hire the talent, or they make pacts where they will share royalties with.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely do it.
But they're very recognizable developers, Spanish developers that work and function like that. And again, if you are not comfortable with the partnership, you can hire. It's always going to be more efficient to pay or to, share that project profits,
Right.
right?
But I would say, I think if you ever want to...
And I can give two examples.
Yeah, but if you sell the business, I would argue that every investor looks at the business, the team is a know-how, experience, and the value of the company.
Yeah,
If you have, outsourcing for
absolutely,
years,
absolutely. But it's a different
that's
positioning.
maybe not the
but
goal.
also,
It's
this
a
is why the
different
question
positioning.
this is
I
why
agree.
the question is complicated, because do you need a team? If you can make a game alone, you can make a game alone. That's fine. Do it. If you want a team, there's 100 different ways that we're like touching on right now that you can have a team. If you want to do business in the games industry, you're going to need a legal entity, whatever way, shape, or form it takes. It can be one person out of 8 that has a legal entity. It can be 8 people that all have a legal entity together. It doesn't matter. Just there has to be a legal entity for Valve or Xbox or Sony to do business with you. Otherwise, they will just not. Right? You can't fill out I forgot the form. The
Ben.
the Ben. You can't fill out the form that you need for the taxes if you don't have a legal entity. It's just how it is. So set up anything and then figure it out from there, but have your legal shit in order. That's it.
Perfect.
So we just ran out of time.
Yeah, for
It's
a
fine, it's
while.
fine. You gave a lot of advices and tools for people to use when they leave the room. So thank you so much all
Thank you,
for.
Karen.
Thank you.
And
thank
again,
you
if
for moderating.
people want to add us on LinkedIn and ask questions, you can totally add
Twitter
me on
for me.
LinkedIn and ask me stuff about
Twitter
contracts and
doesn't
publishing,
exist
whatever.
anymore.
More than happy to answer these
Please
questions.
don't add me on LinkedIn. I never check my LinkedIn. I have not seen it in 6 years. Find me on Twitter or book me via my website. One of those two.
Okay,
All right.
yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.